The email arrived at exactly 4:47 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, buried between spam messages and a reminder about the office potluck next week. No phone call, no meeting request, just a sterile message from HR with my boss David's name copied in, the corner like an afterthought. The subject line read, "Organizational restructuring, action required." And for a split second, I thought it was another company-wide announcement about cost-cutting measures or new policies. I almost deleted it without reading. Instead, I opened it and watched 15 years of my professional life get reduced to 3 sentences. Effective Monday morning, you will be transitioning to a support role under our new VP of Operations, Chen. Please ensure all current projects are transferred and documented by end of business today. Report to HR at 8 a.m. Monday for your new assignment details. That was it. No explanation, no acknowledgement of what I'd built, no recognition that I was personally responsible for maintaining relationships with clients worth over $80 million annually. Just a cold notification that Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had literally saved this company from bankruptcy twice, was being demoted to make room for someone's MBA buddy from Dallas, who had never managed a client account in his entire career. I stared at the screen until the words blurred together, my coffee growing cold in the mug that still read "World's Best Account Manager" from the team gift exchange 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the timing. Friday. Afternoon, end of business day, when most people had already left for the weekend and there would be no chance for immediate confrontation or emotional outbursts in front of the remaining staff. They had planned this, calculated it, orchestrated it to minimize their discomfort while maximizing my isolation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Michelle Mitchell, and I need you to understand something about who I was before this moment changed everything. I'm 41 years old, born and raised in a small town outside San Antonio, where my father taught high school mathematics and my mother ran the local library. I learned early that hard work and loyalty were the foundations of success, that if you proved your worth consistently, recognition would follow naturally. I believed that for exactly 15 years, 2 months, and 17 days. I started at TechBridge Solutions when I was 26, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in business communications and student loans that made my stomach hurt every time I calculated the monthly payments. Austin was booming then, 2008, right before the economic crash that would test every startup and established company in the city. TechBridge occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in East Austin, back when that neighborhood was still affordable and the coffee shops hadn't yet discovered the magic of $12 lattes. The company provided technology consulting services to mid-sized businesses, helping them implement software solutions and manage digital transformations. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary, and I could see the potential for growth if someone paid attention to the details that everyone else ignored. My starting salary was $32,000 a year, which barely covered rent on my studio apartment near campus. But David Kim, who was then just a department manager with ambitions and a genuine smile, promised me that dedication would be rewarded. David was different back then. He remembered people's names, asked about their weekends, and actually listened to suggestions from junior staff. When I proposed a client retention program during my 3rd month, he didn't dismiss it as naive enthusiasm. Instead, he gave me a small budget and 3 months to prove the concept worked. I spent those 3 months learning everything about our top 20 clients, not just their contracts and project requirements, but their business cultures, their pain points, the personalities of their decision makers, and the small details that separated good service from memorable partnership. The program worked better than anyone expected. Client satisfaction scores increased by 37% in the first quarter. Renewal rates jumped from 68% to 89%. More importantly, clients started referring new business specifically because of their experience with our team. David presented the results to upper management, gave me full credit, and promoted me to senior account coordinator with a salary bump that finally allowed me to move into a one-bedroom apartment with actual closet space. That was the last time I would receive credit that clearly. The transformation happened gradually, so slowly that I didn't recognize it until years later when I could look back and see the pattern. Success changed, David, but it also changed the company around us. TechBridge grew from 30 employees to over 200. We moved into a sleek downtown office building with glass walls and conference rooms named after Austin landmarks. The warehouse energy disappeared, replaced by corporate hierarchy and unwritten rules about who belonged in which meetings and whose opinions carried weight. I adapted because that's what I'd always done. When David suggested I take on additional responsibilities without additional compensation, I agreed because I understood the startup mentality of everyone wearing multiple hats. When he asked me to train new hires who would then be promoted above me, I convinced myself it demonstrated my value as a team player. When clients specifically requested to work with me instead of their assigned account managers, I felt proud that my reputation was growing, even if my title remained static. The first major test came during the recession of 2019, when half our clients froze their technology budgets and the other half started shopping for cheaper alternatives. Companies were failing every week, and TechBridge was hemorrhaging money, faster than David could find investors willing to inject emergency funding. The leadership team called an all-hands meeting where they announced temporary salary cuts across the board, reduced benefits, and layoffs that would affect approximately 30% of staff. I volunteered to take a deeper pay cut than required, 20% instead of the standard 10%, because I believed we were all invested in the company's survival. More importantly, I worked 16-hour days for 3 months, personally calling every major client to renegotiate terms, extend payment schedules, and find creative solutions that kept their projects active while accommodating their budget constraints. I sent birthday cards to clients' children, remembered their wedding anniversaries, and showed up at their offices with coffee and solutions when their internal teams were struggling. By the end of that quarter, TechBridge had not only retained 93% of our major clients, but had actually signed 2 new contracts from referrals. The company survived, David got promoted to VP of Client Services, and I received a thank you email and a return to my previous salary. No bonus, no promotion, no acknowledgement that my personal relationships with clients had literally saved everyone's jobs. But I stayed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I stayed because I believed in the mission, because I'd invested too much to walk away, and because David assured me privately that my contributions were recognized even if they weren't always formally acknowledged. He explained that corporate politics required careful timing, that my promotion was inevitable, that patience would be rewarded. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, and because the alternative meant admitting that 15 years of dedication had been systematically undervalued. The clients I'd cultivated during the recession became the foundation of TechBridge's next growth phase. Dataflow Industries, a logistics company based in Houston, expanded their contract with us from $200,000 annually to over $15 million, largely because their CEO trusted my judgment on technology implementations. Meridian Financial increased their partnership from consulting services to full IT management, a relationship worth $12 million per year. Apex Manufacturing, Northwest Retail Group, and Sterling Communications followed similar patterns, growing their investments with TechBridge specifically because of relationships I'd built through years of consistent, personalized service. My client portfolio represented over $80 million in annual revenue for TechBridge, nearly 40% of the company's total income. I knew this because I tracked it obsessively, partly from professional pride and partly from a growing suspicion that my contributions were being diluted in company reports. When board meetings discussed client retention and revenue growth, my name appeared in footnotes if it appeared at all. The presentations focused on systematic improvements and strategic initiatives, rather than the individual relationships that made those numbers possible. David's explanations became more elaborate and less convincing. Corporate restructuring required patience. Optics mattered in front of investors. My unofficial influence was more valuable than formal recognition. He needed me to understand that titles were less important than impact, that my job security came from being indispensable rather than from organizational charts and business cards. I accepted these explanations because rejecting them meant confronting a truth I wasn't ready to face. I had become the invisible foundation that everyone depended on, but no one wanted to acknowledge. My expertise was essential, but my advancement was inconvenient. I was too valuable in my current role to be promoted out of it, but not valuable enough to be included in decisions about the company's direction. The warning signs were everywhere once I learned to recognize them. My access to the executive Slack channel disappeared during a streamlining initiative. Client strategy meetings were rescheduled to times when I had standing commitments I couldn't reschedule. New policies required my client communications to be reviewed and approved by management before being sent, ostensibly to maintain consistent messaging, but effectively to control my relationships with the people who generated our revenue. When I raised concerns about these changes, David's responses followed a predictable pattern. First, he would minimize the issue, suggesting I was reading too much into routine adjustments. Then he would appeal to my loyalty, reminding me how much the company valued my dedication. Finally, he would position himself as my protector, explaining that he was shielding me from corporate politics that I didn't understand. His assistant Jennifer became an unofficial messenger, delivering explanations and apologies that David apparently couldn't deliver himself. She would appear at my desk with sympathetic smiles and updates about meetings I'd been excluded from, policies that affected my work, and decisions that had been made without my input. Jennifer was kind and professional, but her presence in these conversations sent a clear message about my place in the hierarchy. I was being managed rather than consulted. The systematic erasure began so subtly that I initially dismissed it as coincidence. My nameplate disappeared from the senior leadership wall in the main lobby during what Jennifer described as a routine update to reflect current organizational structure. The company newsletter stopped mentioning individual contributors when celebrating client wins, instead crediting successes to the operations team or our dedicated staff. My bio vanished from the company website, and when I asked about it, Jennifer assured me they were updating the format and my profile would be restored soon. It never was. The quarterly company retreat in San Antonio should have been a celebration. TechBridge had just completed its most profitable year. Client satisfaction scores were at all-time highs, and we'd been recognized by 3 industry publications for innovation and service excellence. I'd personally contributed to most of these achievements, managing the client relationships that generated our highest revenue, and implementing the retention strategies that kept our satisfaction scores elevated. The leadership dinner on the first night was invitation only, reserved for directors and above. I wasn't invited. When I mentioned this to David the next morning, he seemed genuinely surprised, calling it an oversight and assuring me it wouldn't happen again. But the message was clear. Despite my contributions, despite my client relationships, despite 15 years of proven results, I wasn't considered leadership material. The final betrayal came disguised as routine business research. I was reviewing office space options for one of my clients when I discovered something that made my stomach drop. TechBridge had signed a lease for new headquarters across town, a smaller building with private offices designated for executive staff only. I downloaded the floor plan out of curiosity and spent an hour studying the layout, looking for my name among the office assignments. It wasn't there. Every department head had an office. Every director had an office. Even Marcus Chen, who hadn't started yet but was already listed as VP of Operations, had a corner office with windows and space for a conference table. My name appeared nowhere on the document. According to TechBridge's future plans, I didn't exist. The confrontation I'd been avoiding for months finally became inevitable. I printed the floor plan, walked to David's corner office, and asked him to explain where I fit into the company's future. His response was delivered without eye contact. His attention focused on email messages that were apparently more important than my 15 years of service. "Sarah, you've been invaluable to this company, but we need fresh perspectives at the executive level. Marcus has experience with enterprise-level operations that will help us scale more effectively. Your role will evolve to focus on what you do best, maintaining client relationships and supporting the team." Marcus Chen, who had never managed a client account in his life. Marcus Chen, whose previous company had filed for bankruptcy 6 months after he left. Marcus Chen, who was younger than my tenure at TechBridge, and whose LinkedIn profile listed strategic vision and operational optimization as primary skills without mentioning a single specific achievement. David finally looked up from his computer screen, perhaps expecting gratitude for the explanation or acceptance of the decision. Instead, he saw something in my expression that made him uncomfortable. For the first time in our working relationship, I wasn't nodding in understanding or asking how I could make the transition easier. I was calculating. That night, I sat in my apartment near South Lamar and made 2 lists on the back of an envelope from my electric bill. The first list contained every client relationship I'd personally built and maintained over 15 years. The second list contained every team member who had confided in me about feeling undervalued, overlooked, or frustrated with the direction TechBridge was heading under its new corporate structure. The overlap between those lists was extensive and illuminating. Instead of calling David to fight for my position or demand explanations I already understood, I opened my laptop and sent a message to Lisa Rodriguez, a former TechBridge colleague, who had left 2 years earlier to start her own consulting firm in Denver. Lisa and I had maintained our friendship despite the distance, bonding over shared experiences of being capable women in an industry that seemed determined to keep us in, supporting roles regardless of our contributions. My message was simple and hypothetical. "Hey Lisa, what would it take to build a client services team from scratch if someone had established relationships with major accounts and a small group of experienced staff?" Her response arrived within an hour, and it changed everything. Lisa's response arrived faster than I expected, appearing in my inbox while I was still staring at the lists I'd made on that crumpled envelope. Her message was characteristically direct and intriguing. "Sarah, that's an interesting hypothetical. Denver's market is exploding right now, especially for boutique firms that can offer personalized service to mid-sized companies. The big consulting groups are losing clients who want more attention and flexibility. If someone had the right relationships and a solid team, they could capture significant market share pretty quickly. Want to talk specifics?" I closed my laptop without responding immediately. The idea was still theoretical, a mental exercise in possibility rather than a concrete plan. But something had shifted in my thinking during the hours since discovering that floor plan. For 15 years, I had operated under the assumption that loyalty would eventually be rewarded, that patience would lead to recognition, that my contributions would speak for themselves. The evidence now suggested that assumption had been fundamentally flawed. The weekend passed in a strange state of suspended animation. I found myself paying attention to details I had previously overlooked, seeing patterns that had been invisible, when I was focused on being the perfect employee. Saturday morning, I drove past TechBridge's future building, a gleaming structure in the domain area that represented everything the company aspired to become. The architecture was impressive, all glass and steel and carefully landscaped outdoor spaces designed to attract the kind of talent that looked good in recruiting brochures. I sat in my car across the street, studying the building and imagining Marcus Chen in his corner office, making decisions about clients he had never met based on spreadsheets that reduced complex relationships to quarterly revenue numbers. The Thought didn't make me angry anymore. It made me curious about what those relationships might be worth in a different context. Sunday afternoon, I did something I had never done in 15 years of employment at TechBridge. I opened my personal files and began copying documents. Not confidential information or proprietary data, but my own records of client interactions, project timelines, and relationship histories that I had maintained separately from company systems. Every thank you note from satisfied clients, every email praising my work, every documentation of problems solved and crises averted. The files painted a picture I had never fully appreciated. My influence extended far beyond the official scope of my position. Clients routinely bypassed their assigned account managers to bring concerns directly to me. They requested my involvement in strategic planning sessions, invited me to industry conferences, and introduced me to colleagues at other companies as their trusted advisor, rather than simply their vendor contact. Reading through years of correspondence, I realized that many of these relationships had evolved beyond typical client service provider dynamics. These people knew my birthday, asked about my family, and shared details about their own lives and careers. They trusted my judgment not just on technology implementations, but on broader business decisions. More importantly, their loyalty was to me personally, rather than to TechBridge as an organization. Monday morning arrived with an email from David, requesting a meeting to discuss my transition timeline. His tone was professional but hurried, suggesting that my replacement process needed to move faster than originally planned. Chen would be starting earlier than expected, and they wanted me to begin training him immediately on client management protocols. The meeting took place in the same conference room where I had presented my client retention program 13 years earlier. David sat across from me with a tablet displaying what appeared to be an organizational chart, pointing to boxes and lines that illustrated my future position in the company hierarchy. The chart showed me reporting to Marcus, who would report to David, who would report to Rachel Thompson, the CEO who had been promoted from CFO 3 years earlier. This structure gives you more focus, David explained, highlighting my reduced responsibilities. You'll be able to concentrate on what you do best without the administrative burden of strategic planning and budget management. Marcus will handle the big picture stuff while you maintain the day-to-day client relationships. I listened to his explanation while studying the chart more carefully. My new position appeared to have no direct reports, no budget authority, and no involvement in contract negotiations or renewal discussions. Essentially, I would become a highly paid customer service representative, handling complaints and routine communications while more important decisions were made by people who had never spoken to our clients. What about data flow industries? I asked, referring to our largest client. James Morrison specifically requested that all communications go through me after the implementation issues last quarter. David's expression tightened slightly. That's exactly the kind of dependency we need to eliminate. It's not healthy for the company to have single points of failure in client relationships. Marcus will work with you to transition those communications to a more sustainable model. The phrase single points of failure lingered in the air between us. After 15 years of being praised for my client relationships, I was now being characterized as a liability. The very connections that had generated millions in revenue were suddenly problematic because they couldn't be easily transferred to someone else. I see, I said, closing the notebook where I had been taking notes. And what's the timeline for this transition? We'd like to have everything transferred within the next 3 weeks. Marcus will shadow you on client calls starting Wednesday, and will gradually shift primary responsibility to him over the following 2 weeks. 3 weeks to unwind 15 years of relationship building. 3 weeks to hand over connections that had taken years to develop. 3 weeks to train someone who had never managed a client account on the nuances of personalities and preferences that determined whether contracts were renewed or terminated. I agreed to the timeline because refusing would have accomplished nothing except accelerating my departure. Instead, I spent the rest of that day making a different kind of list. Every client contact who had ever expressed frustration with corporate bureaucracy. Every project that had succeeded because of personal attention that larger firms couldn't provide. Every conversation where clients had mentioned feeling like just another account number at their previous vendors. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Our most valuable clients had chosen TechBridge specifically because we offered something that bigger consulting firms couldn't deliver: genuine partnership and personalized service. They paid premium rates because they received attention and flexibility that justified the expense. If that personal touch was being systematically eliminated in favor of corporate efficiency, what would prevent them from choosing cheaper alternatives? That evening, I called Lisa Rodriguez from my apartment balcony, watching traffic move along South Lamar while we talked about possibilities that were becoming less hypothetical by the hour. Lisa's firm, Rodriguez and Associates, had grown from a one-person consultancy to a team of 12 in just 2 years. Her success came from exactly the approach TechBridge was abandoning, treating clients as partners rather than account numbers. The market timing is perfect, Lisa explained during our 40-minute conversation. Mid-sized companies are tired of being lost in the shuffle at big firms. They want consultants who understand their business, not just their software requirements. Denver's becoming a major hub for exactly those kinds of companies. She described the clients she was pursuing, many of them familiar names and industries, where I had developed expertise during my years at TechBridge. Technology companies scaling beyond startup phase, but not yet large enough for enterprise-level vendors. Financial services firms updating legacy systems while maintaining regulatory compliance. Manufacturing companies modernizing operations without disrupting production schedules. The challenge isn't finding clients, Lisa continued. It's finding experienced team members who can handle complex implementations while maintaining the personal touch that clients value. If someone had a proven track record and established relationships, we could probably double our revenue within 18 months. I found myself asking detailed questions about Denver's business environment, office space costs, and the logistics of relocating key team members. Lisa answered each question thoroughly, clearly recognizing that our conversation had moved beyond casual speculation into serious planning territory. The next few days passed in a surreal state of professional schizophrenia. During business hours, I dutifully scheduled meetings with Chen, walking him through client files and explaining the historical context behind various contract terms and project specifications. He was polite and attentive, taking detailed notes and asking reasonable questions about processes and procedures. But our conversations revealed fundamental differences in approach that would inevitably create problems. Marcus viewed client relationships as assets to be optimized rather than partnerships to be nurtured. He spoke about efficiency metrics, response time benchmarks, and scalable communication protocols. When I tried to explain that Dataflow's CEO preferred phone calls over email for urgent issues because he processed information better through conversation, Marcus suggested implementing a ticket system that would create better documentation and accountability. Meanwhile, during lunch breaks and evening hours, I was having very different conversations with Jessica Chen, Mike Williams, and Amanda Foster, 3 team members who had become informal advisors and collaborators over the years. None of these conversations were recruitment pitches or direct invitations to leave TechBridge. Instead, they were honest discussions about career goals, job satisfaction, and concerns about the company's changing culture. Jessica had joined TechBridge as a junior implementation specialist 3 years earlier and had quickly proven herself capable of managing complex technical rollouts. But her requests for advancement opportunities had been consistently deflected, with promises of future consideration and suggestions that she needed more experience before taking on additional responsibilities. She was particularly frustrated by the recent hiring of external candidates for positions she had been told she wasn't ready for. Mike had been with the company for 7 years, starting in technical support and gradually expanding his role to include project management and client training. His expertise in system integration had become essential for several major accounts, but his title and compensation hadn't evolved to reflect his expanded responsibilities. When he requested a promotion to senior consultant, he was told that his communication skills needed improvement, despite consistently positive feedback from clients. Amanda's situation was perhaps the most telling. As an account management specialist, she worked directly with clients on contract renewals and service expansions. Her success rate was exceptional, with client retention numbers that consistently exceeded company averages. However, she had been passed over for promotion to account director twice, with management explaining that they needed someone with more strategic vision for the role. The common thread in all three conversations was a sense that TechBridge had become a place where competence was expected but not rewarded, where loyalty was assumed but not reciprocated, and where individual contributions were minimized in favor of team achievements that somehow never translated into individual advancement. These weren't employees who were actively looking to leave. They were talented professionals who had invested years in developing their skills and building relationships within the company. But they were also increasingly frustrated by a corporate culture that seemed designed to keep them in narrowly defined roles regardless of their capabilities or contributions. My conversations with them weren't strategic or manipulative. They were simply honest exchanges between colleagues who had worked together long enough to speak candidly about their experiences and concerns. I didn't suggest they should consider leaving TechBridge, and I didn't mention my own discussions with Lisa Rodriguez. But I did listen carefully to their perspectives and ask questions that helped them articulate their own thoughts about career development and professional satisfaction. By Thursday of that week, I had compiled enough information to make an informed decision about my own future. Lisa's firm could offer me a senior partner position with equity participation and direct involvement in business development strategy. The financial package was competitive with my current compensation, but more importantly, it included the kind of professional recognition and advancement opportunity that had been systematically denied at TechBridge. The Denver market presented legitimate opportunities for growth, particularly in the mid-market segment where Rodriguez and Associates was positioning itself. Client demand for personalized consulting services was strong, and the competitive landscape favored boutique firms that could offer flexibility and attention that larger organizations couldn't match. Most significantly, several of my current clients had expressed interest in working with me regardless of my employer affiliation. During routine account maintenance calls that week, I had tested this proposition indirectly, asking about their satisfaction with TechBridge's service model and their preferences for future consulting relationships. The responses were revealing and consistent. Dataflow's CEO mentioned that he valued continuity in consulting relationships and had been disappointed by vendor changes at previous companies. Meridian Financial's technology director commented that personal relationships were crucial for successful implementations and that he preferred working with consultants who understood his company's unique requirements. Apex Manufacturing's operations manager specifically praised my understanding of their business processes and expressed concern about potential changes in account management. None of these conversations constituted commitments or agreements, but they indicated that client loyalty was indeed personal rather than institutional. If these relationships could be maintained through a different organizational structure, the revenue potential would justify the risks associated with leaving TechBridge. Friday afternoon, I made the call that would change everything. Lisa answered on the second ring, and I didn't waste time with preliminaries. "I'm interested in your offer," I said simply, "but I have conditions that we need to discuss." Our conversation lasted over an hour, covering everything from equity percentages to office location to the timeline for establishing a Denver operation. Lisa was remarkably well prepared for detailed negotiations, suggesting that she had been anticipating this call and had already begun planning for expansion. The terms we discussed were more generous than I had expected. Senior partner status with 25% equity participation, full autonomy over client relationship management and business development strategy, budget authority for hiring and office operations. Most importantly, the opportunity to build something from the ground up, rather than fighting for recognition within an established hierarchy that had already demonstrated its limitations. By the end of our conversation, we had outlined a preliminary agreement that would allow me to transition to Rodriguez and Associates while bringing selected team members and potentially maintaining relationships with existing clients. The legal and ethical implications would require careful navigation, but the basic framework was both feasible and attractive. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a bottle of wine and a legal pad, sketching out the logistics of a transition that had seemed impossible just a week earlier. The list of considerations was extensive. Non-compete agreements, client contract terms, team member recruitment, office space, technology infrastructure, and the complex process of establishing credibility in a new market. But for the first time in years, I was planning for advancement rather than simply hoping for recognition. Instead of waiting for someone else to acknowledge my value, I was creating an opportunity to demonstrate it in an environment where success would translate directly into personal and professional growth. The most challenging aspect wouldn't be the business development or client acquisition. It would be the conversation I needed to have with David Kim on Monday morning, a conversation that would finally force me to acknowledge what had been obvious for months. TechBridge and I had fundamentally different visions for my future. Saturday and Sunday passed in careful preparation. I reviewed my employment contract thoroughly, paying particular attention to non-compete clauses and confidentiality agreements. I researched Colorado business registration requirements and began the process of understanding regulatory compliance for consulting firms. Most importantly, I drafted a resignation letter that was professional, courteous, and completely final. The letter was brief and to the point. I thanked TechBridge for the opportunities provided during my 15 years of employment, indicated that I had accepted a position with another organization, and offered to assist with transition planning during my final 2 weeks. I didn't mention my concerns about the company's direction, my frustration with the reorganization, or my disappointment with how my contributions had been valued. There would be time for those conversations later, if David wanted to have them. But my resignation letter would focus solely on facts and next steps, avoiding emotional language that might complicate the departure process or create unnecessary conflict. Monday morning, I arrived at the office 30 minutes early and spent the time reviewing my files one final time, ensuring that all client documentation was current and properly organized. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked to David's office, with my resignation letter in a sealed envelope, and requested a private meeting. His response would determine whether my departure from TechBridge would be professional and amicable, or whether it would become the kind of contentious separation that damages relationships and creates lasting animosity. Either way, the decision had been made, and there would be no going back. David was reviewing quarterly projections when I knocked on his office door, his attention focused on spreadsheets that reduced 15 years of relationship building to colored cells and percentage calculations. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk without looking up, the same casual dismissiveness that had become his default mode of interaction with me over the past several months. "Give me just a second to finish this," he said, continuing to scroll through what appeared to be revenue forecasts. Marcus sent over some interesting analysis about client acquisition costs versus retention expenses. We might need to restructure some of our account management approaches. I sat quietly, holding the sealed envelope containing my resignation letter, watching him manipulate numbers that represented real people and genuine relationships. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. Here was David, analyzing the financial value of client connections, while remaining completely oblivious to the fact that those connections were about to walk out the door, along with the person who had built them. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, David finally closed his laptop and gave me his attention. His expression was businesslike, but not unfriendly. the practiced demeanor of someone who had learned to manage employee concerns efficiently. "So, Sarah, how are things going with the Marcus transition? I know change can be challenging, but I think you'll find that having someone with his strategic background involved will really elevate our client services to the next level." Instead of responding to his question, I placed the envelope on his desk and slid it across the polished surface until it rested directly in front of him. "David, I need to give you this." He stared at the envelope for several seconds before picking it up, his expression shifting from casual confidence to concern as he registered the formal weight of the moment. When he opened it and began reading, I watched his face transform through a predictable sequence of emotions: surprise, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like amusement. He finished reading and set the letter down carefully, leaning back in his chair with an expression I had never seen before. Then, to my complete astonishment, he began to laugh. Not a nervous chuckle or uncomfortable giggle, but genuine, sustained laughter that filled the office and carried into the hallway. Beyond. "Come on, Sarah," he said when the laughter finally subsided. "Where are you going to go? You've been here forever. This is just growing pains. Every company goes through restructuring phases, and sometimes people get caught up in the emotions of change." He picked up my resignation letter again, waving it dismissively before setting it aside as if it were a minor inconvenience rather than a formal document. "Look, I get it. You're feeling undervalued right now, and that's understandable. Change is hard, especially when you've been such an integral part of our success. But walking away isn't the answer." The casual dismissal of my decision was breathtaking in its arrogance. 15 years of dedication, millions of dollars in client revenue, and countless hours of unpaid overtime had culminated in this moment. And David's response was to laugh and suggest I was having an emotional reaction to routine corporate changes. "Marcus isn't even starting until next month," he continued, apparently convinced that my resignation was a negotiating tactic rather than a final decision. "Take a week to think about it. Maybe we can adjust your role description to address some of your concerns. You know how much this company values what you bring to the team." I had prepared for many possible responses to my resignation, but laughter and dismissal hadn't been among them. The conversation I had imagined involved serious discussion about transition timelines, client handovers, and professional courtesy. Instead, I was being treated like a child throwing a tantrum that would pass once I had time to reflect on my unreasonable expectations. "Actually, David, I've already accepted another position," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the surreal nature of the conversation. "I start with Rodriguez and Associates in Denver next Monday. And I should mention that Jessica Chen, Mike Williams, and Amanda Foster submitted their resignations this morning as well." The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. The amused confidence disappeared, replaced by something much closer to panic. He reached for his phone, presumably to check for messages he might have missed, then looked back at me with genuine alarm. "What are you talking about? Jessica and Mike and Amanda? They didn't say anything about leaving. This is some kind of misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," I replied calmly. "We've all accepted positions with Rodriguez and Associates. Our last day will be Friday, which gives you 2 weeks to transition our responsibilities to other team members." David stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language, his mind apparently struggling to process the implications of what I had just told him. 4 experienced team members representing a significant portion of TechBridge's client-facing expertise were departing simultaneously, and he was clearly unprepared for the operational and financial consequences. "You can't do this," he said finally, his voice rising with obvious desperation. "You have non-compete agreements, client relationships, ongoing projects. This isn't just unprofessional, it's potentially illegal." I had anticipated this response, and had spent considerable time reviewing my employment contract with Lisa's recommended attorney in Denver. Our non-compete agreements are specific to Austin area companies in direct competition with TechBridge. Rodriguez and Associates is based in Denver and serves different market segments. The legal analysis suggests there's no conflict. And the clients? You can't just take our clients with you. I'm not taking anyone, I said honestly. Client. Relationships belong to the clients themselves. If they choose to work with Rodriguez and Associates, that's their decision to make. But I should mention that several major accounts have already expressed concerns about the upcoming changes in account management. This wasn't entirely true yet, but it would be within days. I had already scheduled calls with Dataflow Industries, Meridian Financial, and Apex Manufacturing for later that week to discuss their future consulting needs. Those conversations would be professional and ethical, focusing on their business requirements rather than criticizing TechBridge's service model. David was quiet for several long moments, apparently calculating the financial impact of losing 4 team members and potentially several major clients simultaneously. When he finally spoke again, his tone had shifted from dismissive amusement to genuine concern. Sarah, let's be reasonable about this. If you're not happy with the organizational changes, we can discuss modifications. Maybe Marcus doesn't need to oversee all client relationships. Maybe there's a way to structure things that gives you more autonomy while still achieving our strategic objectives. The offer of compromise came too late and addressed symptoms, rather than the fundamental problem. The issue wasn't the specific details of my role under Marcus Chen's supervision. The issue was a corporate culture that systematically undervalued contributions while expecting unlimited loyalty in return. The decision has been made, I said simply, but I want to ensure a professional transition that protects everyone's interests. I've prepared detailed documentation for all my client accounts, including project histories, contact preferences, and upcoming renewal dates. Jessica, Mike, and Amanda are doing the same for their responsibilities. This is going to destroy our Q3 numbers, David said, apparently thinking out loud rather than addressing me directly. Data flow alone represents $15 million annually. If they follow you to Denver, it's going to be impossible to explain to the board. The panic in his voice was unmistakable now. For 15 years, David had benefited from my ability to maintain client relationships and generate consistent revenue without requiring significant management attention or strategic support. He had taken those results for granted, assuming they were somehow automatic rather than the product of continuous effort and personal investment. I understand this creates challenges, I said, maintaining professional courtesy despite his earlier dismissiveness. That's why we're providing 2 weeks' notice instead of leaving immediately. It should be enough time to reassign responsibilities and communicate with clients about the transition. 2 weeks isn't enough time to transfer relationships you've built over 15 years, David protested. Some of these clients have never worked with anyone else at TechBridge. They're going to be completely lost without you. The admission was telling. After years of being told that my role needed to be restructured to eliminate single points of failure, David was now acknowledging that those client relationships were indeed personal and non-transferable. The same dependencies he had criticized, as organizational weaknesses, were now revealed as essential assets that couldn't be easily replaced. That's something you'll need to work out with Marcus, I replied. I'm sure his strategic background will help him develop effective solutions for maintaining client satisfaction during the transition. The sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable, and David's expression indicated he recognized the implied criticism. Marcus Chen's theoretical expertise in operational optimization would prove inadequate for managing relationships that required years of trust building and personal attention. Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with David alternating between attempts to negotiate my return and efforts to minimize the potential damage from my departure. He suggested delayed start dates, consulting arrangements, and gradual transitions that might preserve key client relationships while allowing organizational changes to proceed. Each proposal revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. This wasn't a workplace disagreement that could be resolved through compromise or accommodation. It was the inevitable result of systematic undervaluation and strategic marginalization that had created an untenable working environment. When it became clear that no amount of negotiation would change my decision, David's demeanor shifted again, this time towards something resembling professional resignation, mixed with barely concealed resentment. "I hope you understand what you're doing," he said finally. "TechBridge has been good to you for 15 years. We've provided opportunities, supported your career development, and trusted you with our most important client relationships. Walking away like this feels like a betrayal of everything we've built together." The accusation of betrayal was particularly galling given the circumstances that had led to my resignation. For 15 years, I had demonstrated unwavering loyalty to TechBridge, often at personal and professional cost. I had worked unpaid overtime, accepted below-market compensation, and prioritized company needs over individual advancement. The suggestion that my departure constituted betrayal, while my systematic marginalization was simply business strategy, revealed a breathtaking lack of self-awareness. "I've given TechBridge 15 years of dedication," I replied evenly. "I think my loyalty to this company has been thoroughly demonstrated. This decision is about my professional future, not about the past." After David finally accepted that the conversation was over, I spent the remainder of that day working with Jessica, Mike, and Amanda to organize our transition documentation. The four of us had coordinated our resignations carefully, ensuring that our departures would create maximum operational disruption while maintaining complete professional propriety. Jessica's resignation focused on her frustration with limited advancement opportunities despite consistently exceeding performance expectations. Her letter mentioned accepting a senior consultant position with Rodriguez and Associates that offered the career development opportunities that had been repeatedly promised but never delivered at TechBridge. Mike's departure was framed around his desire to expand his technical expertise in environments that valued innovation over administrative efficiency. His new role would allow him to work directly with clients on complex implementation projects rather than being restricted to internal support functions. Amanda's resignation emphasized her interest in account management positions with greater strategic responsibility. Rodriguez and Associates had offered her a senior account director role with budget authority and business development opportunities that weren't available within TechBridge's current organizational structure. None of our resignation letters mentioned coordination or group planning. Each was individually crafted to reflect legitimate professional motivations for seeking new opportunities. But the collective impact was unmistakable. TechBridge was losing 4 experienced team members who represented a significant portion of their client-facing expertise. The news of our simultaneous departures spread through the office rapidly, creating exactly the kind of speculation and concern we had anticipated. Other team members began questioning their own career prospects and expressing doubts about the company's direction. The organizational changes that had prompted our resignations were suddenly viewed with suspicion rather than optimism. By Wednesday, David had scheduled emergency meetings with Rachel Thompson and the executive team to discuss damage control strategies. The conversations were obviously stressful, based on the closed-door sessions and hushed phone calls that characterized the management offices throughout the week. Marcus Chen's early start date was moved up again, but his preparation calls with me revealed the fundamental challenge he would face in assuming my responsibilities. Client relationships that had developed over years of personal attention couldn't be transferred through briefing documents and organizational charts. The nuanced understanding of individual preferences, business cultures, and decision-making processes required time and experience that no amount of strategic planning could accelerate. Thursday morning brought the first client inquiry that David had been dreading. Dataflow Industries' CEO called asking to speak with me about their upcoming contract renewal, a conversation that had been scheduled for the following week. When David explained that I would be leaving the company, the response was immediate and predictable. "What do you mean leaving?" "Sarah's been our primary contact for 8 years. She understands our business better than most of our internal staff. This is completely unacceptable." The call lasted over an hour, with David attempting to reassure Dataflow's leadership that the transition would be seamless and that Marcus Chen's expertise would enhance their service experience. Based on David's expression when the call ended, those assurances had not been well received. Similar conversations followed with Meridian Financial and Apex Manufacturing, each producing increasingly desperate attempts to maintain client confidence while acknowledging that their primary relationships were departing. By Thursday afternoon, David was offering consulting arrangements, delayed transition dates, and other compromises that might preserve key accounts. The proposals were professionally presented but operationally impossible. Working as a consultant for TechBridge while employed by Rodriguez and Associates would create obvious conflicts of interest. Delayed departures would complicate our start dates in Denver and potentially violate our new employment agreements. More importantly, the offers missed the fundamental point of our resignations. We weren't leaving because of compensation or specific job responsibilities. We were leaving because of a corporate culture that systematically undervalued contributions while expecting unlimited loyalty in return. Friday afternoon, our final day at TechBridge, David made one last attempt to negotiate our return. He called a meeting with all 4 of us, presenting a comprehensive retention package that included salary increases, title promotions, and modified reporting structures that would address many of our stated concerns. The offer was generous by TechBridge standards, representing the kind of recognition and advancement that had been repeatedly denied during our years of service. But it came too late and for the wrong reasons. These improvements weren't being offered because our contributions had suddenly been recognized as valuable. They were being offered because our departures threatened to create financial consequences that management couldn't ignore. "We've already committed to Rodriguez and Associates," I explained when David finished his presentation. "Our new positions start Monday, and we've signed employment agreements that we intend to honor." "Then break them," David said desperately. "Whatever they're offering, we can match it. You belong here, all of you. This is your home." The irony was overwhelming. For years, we had been told that TechBridge couldn't afford competitive salaries, couldn't provide advancement opportunities, and couldn't modify organizational structures to recognize our contributions. Suddenly, when faced with the consequences of losing us, all of those limitations had mysteriously disappeared. Our final afternoon was spent completing transition documentation and saying goodbye to colleagues who would remain at TechBridge. Many of them expressed envy about our new opportunities and concerns about their own futures within the company. Several mentioned that they would be interested in hearing about additional openings at Rodriguez and Associates if the Denver expansion continued successfully. At 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon, we cleared our desks, returned our company equipment, and walked out of TechBridge's offices for the final time. David watched from his office window as we loaded our personal belongings into our cars, his expression a mixture of disbelief and resignation. The weekend before starting our new positions was surreal in its normalcy. After months of planning and preparation, the actual transition felt almost anticlimactic. We had successfully executed our departures without creating legal complications or burning professional bridges. TechBridge would survive our resignations, though not without significant operational and financial challenges. More importantly, we had demonstrated that loyalty was a two-way commitment, that professional relationships required mutual respect and recognition, and that talented individuals had options when their current employers failed to provide appropriate opportunities for growth and advancement. Monday morning in Denver would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one where our contributions would be valued from the start, rather than gradually eroded through systematic marginalization. The financial and professional opportunities at Rodriguez and Associates were attractive, but the prospect of working in an environment that actively supported our success was even more appealing. David's laughter at my resignation had revealed everything I needed to know about how my 15 years of service had been perceived and valued. His panic over the following days had demonstrated the real worth of the relationships and expertise he had taken for granted. The contrast between those two reactions told the complete story of why leaving had been not just the right decision, but the only viable option for any self-respecting professional. The first indication that our departure had created more than routine operational challenges came through a LinkedIn message from Jennifer, David's assistant, sent 3 weeks after we'd started at Rodriguez and Associates in Denver. Her note was carefully worded and professionally neutral, but the underlying desperation was unmistakable. "Hi, Sarah. I hope you're settling in well with your new position. David asked me to reach out regarding some client transition questions that have come up. Would you have time for a brief call to clarify a few details about the data flow account? Nothing urgent, just some background information that would help Marcus get up to speed more quickly." I showed the message to Lisa Rodriguez, who was in my office reviewing our client acquisition progress for the first quarter. Lisa read it twice before looking up with an expression of amused recognition. Translation: their biggest client is threatening to terminate, and they have no idea how to manage the relationship, she said. "I've seen this pattern before when established firms lose key relationship managers. The damage compounds faster than anyone expects." Lisa was right, though the full extent of TechBridge's crisis wouldn't become apparent for several more weeks. What I didn't know at the time was that Jennifer's message represented just one element of an increasingly frantic effort to contain the fallout from our simultaneous resignations. The initial client reactions had been swift and severe. Data flow. Industries had postponed their contract renewal pending resolution of service provider changes, effectively freezing $15 million in annual revenue while they evaluated alternatives. Meridian Financial had requested detailed transition plans and backup service arrangements before committing to any additional projects. Apex Manufacturing had begun soliciting proposals from competing consulting firms, including Rodriguez and Associates. Marcus Chen's attempts to assume my responsibilities had revealed the fundamental impossibility of transferring relationships that had been built through years of personal investment and trust. His first call with Dataflow's CEO had lasted exactly 12 minutes before being terminated with a request to speak with someone who understood their business requirements. Similar conversations with other major clients had produced increasingly hostile responses and explicit threats to seek alternative service providers. By the end of our second week in Denver, Rachel Thompson herself had called my personal cell phone, circumventing David entirely in an attempt to negotiate some form of consulting arrangement that might preserve key client relationships. Her tone was professional but unmistakably stressed as she outlined the challenges TechBridge was facing in the aftermath of our departures. "Sarah, I need to be direct with you," Rachel said during our 30-minute conversation. "We're looking at potential losses that could exceed $60 million over the next 2 years if we can't stabilize these client relationships. Dataflow is actively reviewing competitor proposals. Meridian has put 2 major projects on hold, and 3 other accounts have requested meetings to discuss their contracts." The numbers were staggering, but not entirely surprising. What I had built over 15 years couldn't be replaced in 3 weeks, regardless of Marcus Chen's strategic background or David's management experience. Client loyalty was personal, based on trust and understanding that required time to develop and couldn't be transferred through organizational charts or briefing documents. "I understand the challenges you're facing," I replied carefully, "but I'm committed to my new position here in Denver. Rodriguez and Associates has made significant investments in our expansion, and I have obligations to honor those commitments." Rachel's response revealed the depth of TechBridge's desperation. She offered a consulting retainer worth more than my annual salary at TechBridge, flexible scheduling that would accommodate my responsibilities in Denver, and equity participation that would have made me a partial owner of the company I had just left. The proposal was financially attractive, but operationally impossible. Working as a consultant for TechBridge while building Rodriguez and Associates' Austin market presence would create obvious conflicts of interest. More importantly, it would require me to help solve problems that TechBridge had created through their own poor decision-making and systematic undervaluation of their existing staff. I appreciate the offer, I told Rachel, but it's not something I can pursue. My focus needs to be on building success here rather than managing transition challenges there. The conversation ended with mutual professional courtesy, but I could hear the frustration in Rachel's voice as she realized that their most viable solution for preserving client relationships was no longer available to them. Meanwhile, our experience at Rodriguez and Associates was exceeding even Lisa's optimistic projections for growth and client development. The Denver market was indeed hungry for the kind of personalized consulting services that larger firms couldn't provide, and our track record from TechBridge opened doors that might have remained closed to a completely new team. Jessica had immediately proven her value by developing implementation protocols that reduced project timelines by an average of 23%, while maintaining higher quality standards than she had been able to achieve at TechBridge. Her innovative approach to client training and system integration was generating referrals and contract extensions that contributed directly to our revenue growth. Mike's technical expertise was being utilized in ways that TechBridge had never allowed, with clients specifically requesting his involvement in complex system migrations and security implementations. His ability to translate technical requirements into business solutions was creating opportunities for expanded service offerings and premium pricing that reflected the true value of his skills. Amanda's account management capabilities were flourishing in an environment that encouraged relationship building rather than simply processing renewals and managing complaints. Her proactive approach to client development was identifying growth opportunities that added substantial value to existing contracts while strengthening long-term partnerships. Most significantly, our collective experience and established relationships were enabling Rodriguez and Associates to pursue larger, more complex projects that had previously been beyond the firm's capabilities. We weren't just adding individual expertise to Lisa's team. We were transforming the company's market position and competitive standing. The contrast with our final months at TechBridge was stark and illuminating. Here, our contributions were immediately recognized and appropriately compensated. Strategic decisions included our input rather than being made around us. Professional development was encouraged and supported rather than delayed and deflected. Most importantly, success was measured by results and client satisfaction rather than compliance with organizational structures that prioritized efficiency over effectiveness. 6 weeks after our departure from TechBridge, the full magnitude of their crisis became public knowledge through industry publications and competitor intelligence. Dataflow Industries had officially terminated their contract and signed with a Houston-based consulting firm for services worth $18 million annually. Meridian Financial had reduced their engagement to basic maintenance only, eliminating $12 million in planned expansion projects. Apex Manufacturing had initiated a competitive bidding process that included Rodriguez and Associates among the qualified vendors. The cumulative impact on TechBridge's financial performance was catastrophic. Second quarter revenues dropped by 37% compared to the previous year, forcing layoffs, budget cuts, and emergency refinancing that diluted existing equity holders. Stock price declined by over 50%, and industry analysts were openly questioning the company's long-term viability without major operational changes. David Kim's position became increasingly precarious as board members and investors demanded explanations for the client exodus and revenue collapse. The organizational restructuring that had prompted our resignations was quietly abandoned, with Marcus Chen departing after just 2 months when it became apparent that his strategic vision couldn't compensate for the loss of established relationships and operational expertise. The irony of TechBridge's situation wasn't lost on industry observers who understood the consulting business dynamics. A company that had prioritized corporate efficiency over relationship management had discovered that their most valuable assets weren't systems or processes, but the people who had built and maintained client connections through years of personal investment and professional dedication. Rachel Thompson's attempts to stabilize the company included hiring expensive external consultants, implementing customer retention programs, and launching aggressive marketing campaigns designed to attract new clients. These efforts consumed additional resources while producing minimal results, further accelerating TechBridge's financial decline. By the end of our third month in Denver, Rodriguez and Associates had grown from 12 employees to 26, with expansion plans that would double that number within the following year. Our success in capturing displaced TechBridge business was contributing to broader market recognition and client referrals that extended far beyond our original relationship networks. The financial impact of our departure from TechBridge had, indeed, exceeded the $60 million estimate that Rachel Thompson had mentioned during our phone conversation. When the full accounting was completed at year-end, total losses attributed directly and indirectly to our resignations approached $75 million in lost revenue, client acquisition costs, legal fees, and organizational restructuring expenses. More damaging than the immediate financial impact was the reputational damage within Austin's tight-knit business community. Word spread quickly about TechBridge's inability to retain key personnel and maintain client relationships, making it difficult to attract either qualified employees or new business opportunities. Competitors began actively recruiting TechBridge's remaining staff, offering improved compensation and advancement opportunities that the company could no longer afford to match. David's tenure as VP of Client Services ended in September, when the board decided that new leadership was essential for rebuilding client confidence and organizational stability. His departure was announced as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities, but industry insiders understood that he had been removed as part of a broader effort to distance TechBridge from the failed restructuring initiative. I learned about David's termination through a brief mention in an Austin Business Journal article about executive changes in the local technology sector. The news generated no satisfaction or sense of vindication, only a mild sadness about the unnecessary destruction of what had once been a successful partnership. David's fundamental misunderstanding of relationship management and employee motivation had created problems that extended far beyond my individual experience, ultimately costing him his own career advancement. The transformation of Rodriguez and Associates continued throughout the remainder of that first year, with our Austin market expertise enabling expansion into Texas that generated over $40 million in new business within 12 months. Our success attracted attention from private equity firms interested in funding additional growth, creating opportunities for equity participation that would provide long-term financial security for all of us. Looking back on the decision to leave TechBridge, I recognize that David's dismissive laughter during our resignation meeting had actually been a gift, though he certainly hadn't intended it that way. His reaction had crystallized everything I needed to understand about how my contributions were valued and what my future prospects would be within that organizational culture. The laughter had revealed his fundamental belief that I lacked viable alternatives, that 15 years of service had created dependency rather than expertise, and that loyalty could be assumed rather than earned through mutual respect and appropriate recognition. His subsequent panic when faced with the consequences demonstrated the gap between his perceptions and reality. Jessica, Mike, Amanda, and I had proven that talented, dedicated professionals always have options when their current employers fail to provide appropriate opportunities for growth and advancement. We had shown that client relationships, while valuable, belong ultimately to the clients themselves, who make decisions based on service quality and personal trust rather than corporate loyalty. Most importantly, we had demonstrated that sometimes the best response to systematic undervaluation isn't fighting for recognition within existing structures, but creating new opportunities where contributions are appreciated from the beginning rather than gradually eroded through organizational indifference. The final vindication came exactly 1 year after our departure, when Rodriguez and Associates was selected as the primary technology consulting partner for 3 Fortune 500 companies, expanding their operations in the Mountain West region. The contracts were worth over $100 million annually and represented exactly the kind of enterprise-level business that TechBridge had aspired to capture before their strategic missteps destroyed their market credibility. During Aus, the celebration dinner marking this milestone achievement, Lisa Rodriguez raised a toast that perfectly captured the journey we had all taken together. To second chances, better decisions, and the courage to recognize our own worth, she said, looking around the table at faces that reflected satisfaction, success, and the confidence that comes from working in an environment where contributions are valued appropriately. David's laughter had been intended to diminish my resignation and reinforce his belief that I was trapped by circumstance and limited options. Instead, it had marked the beginning of professional growth and financial success that exceeded anything TechBridge could have provided. Sometimes the most revealing moments in our careers come not from praise or recognition, but from dismissal and disrespect that forces us to recognize our true value and pursue opportunities worthy of our capabilities. The $60 million loss that TechBridge experienced wasn't revenge or sabotage. It was simply the natural consequence of failing to recognize and retain the people whose expertise and relationships had generated their success. David's laughter had been the sound of a leader who fundamentally misunderstood the dynamics of professional loyalty and personal worth. The silence that followed our departure was the sound of a company learning that some mistakes are too expensive to survive. 2 years after leaving TechBridge, I found myself standing in the lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Austin, waiting for a meeting I never thought would happen. The invitation had come through Rachel Thompson's executive assistant, requesting a private conversation about potential partnership opportunities between Rodriguez and Associates and what remained of TechBridge Solutions. The irony of the location wasn't lost on me. This was the same hotel where TechBridge had held their annual leadership retreats, the ones I had never been invited to attend, despite generating 40% of their revenue. Rachel arrived precisely on time, looking older and more tired than I remembered from our days working in the same building. The stress of managing TechBridge's decline over the past 24 months had clearly taken its toll, visible in the new lines around her eyes and the careful way she carried herself. She greeted me with genuine warmth, though I could sense the underlying tension of someone who was about to ask for help from the person whose departure had precipitated her company's crisis. We settled into a quiet corner of the hotel's restaurant, ordering coffee while engaging in the kind of polite conversation that precedes difficult business discussions. Rachel asked about my experience in Denver, complimented Rodriguez and Associates' success in the Texas market, and acknowledged the impressive client roster we had built in such a short time. I reciprocated by expressing sympathy for the challenges TechBridge had faced and recognition of the difficult decisions she'd been forced to make as CEO. The pleasantries concluded when Rachel leaned forward slightly and addressed the real purpose of our meeting with characteristic directness. "Sarah, I'm going to be completely honest with you because I think we're past the point where anything else makes sense. TechBridge is in serious trouble, and a significant part of that trouble stems from losing you and your team. I'm here to explore whether there's any possibility of rebuilding a working relationship between our companies." Her admission was both surprising and expected. Surprising because it represented a level of accountability I hadn't anticipated from TechBridge's leadership. Expected because the company's continued struggles had been well documented in industry, publications, and Austin business media. What I hadn't fully understood was how desperate their situation had become. Rachel proceeded to outline TechBridge's current circumstances with brutal honesty. The company had lost 68% of its major client base over the past 2 years, forcing them to downsize from over 200 employees to fewer than 70. 3 rounds of layoffs had eliminated most of their experienced technical staff, leaving them unable to compete for the complex implementation projects that had once been their specialty. Emergency financing had kept them operational, but at the cost of significant equity dilution and restrictive covenants that limited their strategic flexibility. "We're essentially a different company now," Rachel explained, her voice carrying a mixture of resignation and determination. "Smaller, focused on basic consulting services, trying to rebuild credibility one client at a time, but we still have some valuable assets. Our Austin market presence, established vendor relationships, and a core team of people who understand the local business environment." She paused to sip her coffee before continuing with the proposal that had prompted our meeting. "What I'm wondering is whether Rodriguez and Associates might be interested in some form of strategic partnership. Not an acquisition or merger, but a collaboration that could benefit both companies. You have the client relationships and technical expertise we've lost. We have infrastructure and market knowledge that could accelerate your expansion plans." The proposal was intriguing from a business perspective, though the personal dynamics made it considerably more complex. Rachel was essentially asking me to help solve problems that TechBridge had created through their own poor decision-making, using expertise they had systematically undervalued when I was their employee. The financial opportunity was potentially significant, but it would require working with people who had demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of professional relationships and employee motivation. I listened carefully to Rachel's complete presentation, which included detailed financial projections, partnership structures, and timeline proposals. She had clearly spent considerable time developing this initiative, suggesting that TechBridge's board had authorized significant concessions to make collaboration possible. The terms were generous, acknowledging Rodriguez and Associates as the senior partner in any joint ventures, and providing profit-sharing arrangements that heavily favored our firm. When Rachel finished her presentation, I asked the question that had been forming throughout our conversation. "Where does David fit into this partnership proposal? Would he be involved in managing the collaboration between our companies?" Rachel's expression shifted uncomfortably, and she took a longer pause before responding. "David is no longer with TechBridge. His departure was part of the leadership changes we made last year to refocus our strategic direction. The partnership I'm proposing would be managed directly between you and me, with clear reporting structures that wouldn't involve anyone from the previous management team." The news of David's termination didn't surprise me, given TechBridge's performance decline, and the need for scapegoats to explain the crisis to investors and board members. What was revealing was Rachel's careful phrasing about his departure, suggesting that his removal had been neither voluntary nor amicable. The executive who had laughed at my resignation and insisted I had no viable alternatives had ultimately discovered that his own options were more limited than he had realized. I thanked Rachel for her detailed presentation and honest assessment of TechBridge's situation, but explained that any partnership decision would require extensive discussion with Lisa Rodriguez and our Denver leadership team. The proposal represented a significant strategic opportunity, but it also involved risks and complications that needed careful evaluation. More importantly, it would require us to work with an organization that had demonstrated serious weaknesses in leadership judgment and employee relations. Over the following weeks, Lisa and I conducted thorough due diligence on TechBridge's current operations, financial condition, and market position. What we discovered was both worse and better than Rachel's presentation had indicated. The company's financial situation was indeed precarious, with cash flow problems that could force closure within 18 months without significant new revenue. However, their remaining staff included several talented individuals who had survived the downsizing and might represent valuable additions to our team. More intriguingly, TechBridge's client losses had created opportunities in the Austin market that Rodriguez and Associates was well positioned to capture. Many of their former clients were actively seeking alternative consulting partners, and our reputation for relationship-focused service made us attractive candidates for those contracts. Rather than partnering with TechBridge's diminished operation, we could potentially acquire their remaining assets and client relationships through a structured acquisition. The acquisition discussions that followed were surreal in their complete reversal of power dynamics. 2 years earlier, I had been a marginalized employee whose contributions were systematically undervalued and whose departure was treated as an inconvenience. Now I was representing the acquiring company in negotiations to purchase the firm that had once employed me, with the leverage to dictate terms and conditions. Rachel's desperation became increasingly apparent as the negotiations progressed. TechBridge's board had authorized her to accept almost any reasonable offer that would preserve some jobs and provide partial recovery for investors. The company's brand value had been severely damaged, but their office lease, equipment, and remaining client contracts represented tangible assets that could accelerate Rodriguez and Associates' Austin expansion. The final acquisition terms were structured to benefit Rodriguez and Associates while providing TechBridge's stakeholders with enough recovery to avoid complete financial devastation. We agreed to purchase TechBridge's assets for $12 million, assume responsibility for their remaining employees, and honor existing client contracts under the Rodriguez and Associates brand. Rachel would join our leadership team as Austin, operations director, managing the integration process and maintaining continuity with local business relationships. The announcement of the acquisition generated significant attention in Austin's business community, where the dramatic reversal of fortune was seen as a cautionary tale about employee retention and relationship management. Industry publications covered the story as an example of how quickly established companies could lose market position when they failed to recognize and retain key talent. What received less public attention was the personal satisfaction I experienced in being able to preserve jobs for TechBridge employees who had been caught up in leadership failures beyond their control. Jennifer, David's former assistant, became our Austin office manager. Several junior consultants who had shown promise but lacked advancement opportunities at TechBridge were promoted to senior positions within our expanded organization. Most importantly, we were able to restore stability and career prospects for people whose livelihoods had been threatened by strategic decisions they had no role in making. The integration process revealed the full extent of damage that TechBridge's leadership failures had created. Client files were incomplete, project documentation was inconsistent, and financial records showed a pattern of corner-cutting and deferred maintenance that had compromised service quality. Rebuilding these systems required significant investment, but it also provided opportunities to implement Rodriguez and Associates' higher standards and more comprehensive service approaches. 6 months after the acquisition, I received an unexpected phone call from David Kim, who had apparently been tracking our success through industry publications and mutual professional contacts. His tone was subdued, lacking the confident authority that had characterized our working relationship during my years at TechBridge. He congratulated me on the acquisition and acknowledged that my departure had been a significant factor in the company's subsequent struggles. "I wanted to reach out because I think I owe you an apology," David said during our 20-minute conversation. "Looking back, I realize I didn't handle the reorganization well, and I didn't appreciate the value you brought to the company. Your success with Rodriguez and Associates has proven that my assessment of the situation was completely wrong." The apology was appreciated, but unnecessary. David's mistakes had been educational rather than malicious, revealing important lessons about professional relationships and organizational dynamics that had ultimately contributed to my career advancement. His dismissive laughter during my resignation meeting had crystallized my understanding of how I was perceived and valued, forcing me to recognize opportunities I might otherwise have overlooked. "I appreciate the call," I told David honestly, "but the experience taught me valuable lessons about recognizing my own worth and pursuing opportunities where contributions are properly valued." Everything worked out exactly as it should have. David's current situation illustrated the consequences of leadership failures in relationship-dependent industries. He had been unemployed for over 8 months, struggling to find executive positions that matched his previous compensation and responsibility levels. His reputation for poor employee retention and client relationship management had made him a risky hire for companies that understood the importance of those capabilities. The contrast between our career trajectories since leaving TechBridge was stark and instructive. David's dismissive attitude toward employee concerns and relationship management had ultimately cost him his own career advancement. My focus on building genuine partnerships and delivering exceptional service had created opportunities for growth and success that exceeded anything TechBridge could have provided. As Rodriguez and Associates approached the 2-year anniversary of the TechBridge acquisition, our combined operations had generated over $150 million in revenue, established partnerships with 8 Fortune 500 companies, and employed over 90 people across Denver and Austin. The success was gratifying from both financial and professional perspectives, but it was particularly satisfying as validation of the principles that had guided our departure from TechBridge. The transformation of our former workplace was complete and irreversible. The building that had once housed TechBridge's headquarters now displayed Rodriguez and Associates signage, and the conference rooms where I had been excluded from strategic discussions were now spaces where my input was sought and valued. The organizational chart that had once marginalized my contributions now showed me as a senior partner with equity participation and decision-making authority. Most importantly, the culture that had systematically undervalued relationships and employee contributions had been replaced by an environment that recognized talent, rewarded performance, and encouraged professional growth. New employees were promoted based on merit rather than politics. Client relationships were nurtured rather than transferred, and individual contributions were acknowledged rather than absorbed into generic team achievements. The lessons learned from TechBridge's failures had become foundational principles for Rodriguez and Associates' continued success. We understood that client relationships were personal investments that required time and attention to develop properly. We recognized that employee retention was essential for maintaining service quality and institutional knowledge. Most importantly, we appreciated that professional loyalty was a mutual commitment that required appropriate recognition and compensation to sustain. 3 years after David's dismissive laughter had inadvertently launched my departure from TechBridge, I found myself presenting at an industry conference about relationship management and employee retention in consulting services. The audience included executives from firms throughout Texas and the Southwest, many of whom were struggling with the same challenges that had ultimately destroyed TechBridge's market position. During the question and answer session, someone asked about the personal motivation for leaving an established position to pursue entrepreneurial opportunities. My response drew directly from the experience that had shaped Rodriguez and Associates' approach to business development and organizational culture. Sometimes the most valuable thing a leader can teach you is how not to treat people, I explained to the audience. When someone dismisses your contributions and laughs at your alternatives, they're giving you essential information about their values and judgment. The key is recognizing that information as a gift rather than an insult, and using it to make better decisions about your professional future. The story of TechBridge's collapse and Rodriguez and Associates' success had become a case study in business schools and professional development programs, illustrating the financial consequences of poor relationship management and the opportunities created when talented individuals are properly valued and supported. David's laughter had indeed marked a turning point, though not in the direction he had anticipated. The final vindication came when Rodriguez and Associates was selected as the primary technology consulting partner for the state of Texas, a contract worth over $200 million over 5 years. The announcement was made in the same Austin Business Journal that had once covered TechBridge's growth and later documented their decline. This time, the story was about our success, our innovative approaches to client service, and our commitment to employee development and retention. Looking back on the journey from marginalized employee to successful entrepreneur, I recognized that every challenge had contributed to ultimate success. David's systematic marginalization had forced me to document my contributions and recognize my true value. His dismissive laughter had eliminated any lingering doubts about leaving TechBridge. His subsequent panic had confirmed that my departure would create consequences he hadn't anticipated. Most importantly, his failure to understand the dynamics of professional relationships and employee motivation had created opportunities for building something better. Rodriguez and Associates' success wasn't revenge against David or TechBridge. It was proof that talent, properly valued and supported, could achieve remarkable results when given appropriate opportunities and recognition. The $60 million loss that David's decisions had inflicted on TechBridge was ultimately a small price compared to the value created through Rodriguez and Associates' growth and success. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that teach us what not to do, and sometimes the most revealing moments in our careers come from people who show us exactly how much we're worth by demonstrating how little they value our contributions. David's laughter had been intended to diminish my resignation and reinforce my dependency on TechBridge's employment. Instead, it had marked the beginning of professional independence and financial success that exceeded anything his organizational restructuring could have provided. The sound of someone who fundamentally misunderstood professional relationships had become the starting point for building partnerships based on mutual respect, appropriate recognition, and shared success. 5 years had passed since that fateful Monday morning when David Kim's laughter echoed through his corner office, dismissing my resignation as an emotional overreaction that would resolve itself once I came to my senses. Today, I stood in the boardroom of Rodriguez and Associates' new headquarters in downtown Denver, looking out at the Rocky Mountains while reviewing the final documents for our initial public offering. The company that had started as Lisa's small, boutique firm was about to become a publicly traded corporation with a market valuation approaching $800 million. The transformation had been extraordinary by any measure, but it felt particularly surreal given the circumstances that had brought me to this moment. What began as an escape from systematic marginalization had evolved into building one of the most successful consulting firms in the Southwest, with offices in 6 cities and strategic partnerships extending across North America. The personal vindication was satisfying, but the professional achievement was genuinely transformative for everyone involved. Lisa Rodriguez sat across from me at the conference table, reviewing the prospectus that would be distributed to institutional investors later that week. Her expression reflected the same mixture of pride and disbelief that I was experiencing as we prepared to take Rodriguez and Associates public. The company we had built together bore little resemblance to the firm I had joined 5 years earlier, when desperation and opportunity had combined to create an unlikely partnership. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Lisa said, looking up from the financial projections that documented our remarkable growth trajectory. "That phone call you made from Austin, asking hypothetically about building a client services team from scratch. Did you have any idea where this would lead?" The honest answer was that I hadn't envisioned anything approaching our current success. My initial contact with Lisa had been motivated by frustration and curiosity, rather than any grand strategic vision. I was simply exploring alternatives to a professional situation that had become untenable, seeking validation that my skills and experience had value beyond TechBridge's diminishing recognition. What I had discovered was that Lisa's entrepreneurial instincts and my relationship management expertise created synergies that neither of us could have achieved independently. Her vision for personalized consulting services aligned perfectly with my understanding of what clients actually valued in professional partnerships. My established relationships provided immediate credibility and revenue opportunities that accelerated her expansion plans beyond anything she had previously considered possible. The initial success with displaced TechBridge clients had been just the beginning. Our reputation for delivering exceptional service while maintaining genuine partnerships had generated referrals that extended far beyond our original network. Companies throughout the region began seeking our services specifically because of testimonials from satisfied clients who praised our responsiveness, expertise, and commitment to understanding their unique business requirements. More importantly, Our approach to employee development and retention created a virtuous cycle that distinguished Rodriguez and Associates from larger consulting firms that struggled with turnover and client relationship instability. We promoted talented individuals based on performance rather than tenure, provided equity participation that aligned personal success with company growth, and maintained a culture where contributions were recognized rather than absorbed into generic team achievements. The irony of building such an organization wasn't lost on me, given my experience with TechBridge's systematic undervaluation of employee contributions. Every policy decision and cultural norm at Rodriguez and Associates had been influenced by lessons learned from observing what happened when companies failed to appreciate and retain talented individuals. We had essentially created the organizational environment that I had hoped TechBridge would become, but in a context where we controlled the strategic direction. Jessica Chen had become our VP of Technical Operations, leading implementation teams that consistently exceeded client expectations while maintaining project timelines and budgets that industry competitors struggled to match. Her innovative approaches to system integration and client training had become standard practices that we licensed to other consulting firms, creating additional revenue streams while establishing Rodriguez and Associates as a thought leader in operational excellence. Mike Williams now served as Chief Technology Officer, developing proprietary solutions that addressed recurring client challenges while creating competitive advantages that larger firms couldn't replicate. His expertise in complex system migrations and security implementations had made Rodriguez and Associates the preferred vendor for high-stakes technology transformations, commanding premium rates that reflected the specialized value we provided. Amanda Foster had evolved into our Director of Strategic Partnerships, building relationships with software vendors, technology platforms, and complementary service providers that enhanced our capabilities while generating revenue-sharing opportunities. Her ability to identify and develop mutually beneficial collaborations had become essential to our expansion strategy, creating networks that extended our reach while maintaining the personalized service approach that clients valued. The collective success of our core team illustrated principles that seemed obvious in retrospect but had been systematically ignored at TechBridge. Talented individuals flourished when given appropriate opportunities and recognition. Client relationships strengthened when managed by people who understood their business requirements and maintained consistent communication. Organizational growth accelerated when employee development aligned with strategic objectives rather than conflicting with administrative convenience. As Rodriguez and Associates prepared for public ownership, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this remarkable destination. The path hadn't been linear or predictable, but each challenge had contributed essential knowledge and capabilities that proved crucial for subsequent success. David's systematic marginalization had forced me to document my contributions and recognize my true value. His dismissive laughter had eliminated emotional attachments that might have prevented decisive action. His subsequent panic had confirmed that my departure would create consequences extending far beyond his immediate comprehension. Most significantly, the entire experience had taught me that professional loyalty was indeed a mutual commitment, requiring appropriate recognition and compensation to sustain. Companies that understood this dynamic could build lasting competitive advantages through employee retention and client relationship stability. Organizations that failed to recognize these connections faced inevitable consequences when talented individuals found better opportunities elsewhere. The lessons learned from TechBridge's failures had become foundational elements of Rodriguez and Associates' continued success, but they had also influenced broader industry conversations about relationship management and organizational culture. Our case study was now taught in business schools as an example of how individual talent could create enormous value when properly supported and recognized. Industry conferences regularly featured discussions about employee retention strategies and the financial consequences of failing to appreciate key contributors. The public offering process itself had become an opportunity to share these insights with potential investors who were evaluating Rodriguez and Associates' long-term prospects. Our prospectus emphasized the correlation between employee satisfaction and client retention, documenting how our approach to talent development had created sustainable competitive advantages that larger firms struggled to replicate. Institutional investors were particularly interested in our employee equity participation program, which had aligned personal financial success with company performance while creating retention incentives that reduced turnover costs and maintained relationship continuity. The program had been inspired directly by my frustration with TechBridge's failure to provide advancement opportunities that reflected actual contributions, demonstrating how negative experiences could generate positive innovations when properly analyzed and addressed. The week before our IPO launch, I received an unexpected email from David Kim, who had apparently been following Rodriguez and Associates' success through business publications and professional networks. His message was thoughtful and introspective, acknowledging mistakes he had made during my final months at TechBridge, while expressing genuine admiration for what we had accomplished since my departure. Sarah, I've been reading about Rodriguez and Associates' IPO and wanted to congratulate you on an extraordinary achievement, David wrote. I know my reaction to your resignation was inappropriate and reflected poor judgment about the value you brought to TechBridge. Your success has taught me important lessons about leadership and relationship management that I wish I had understood earlier in my career. His email continued with updates about his current situation, which illustrated the lasting consequences of the decisions he had made during TechBridge's reorganization. After 18 months of unemployment following his termination, David had eventually found a consulting position with a small firm in Dallas, working on project management assignments that provided steady income but limited advancement opportunities. His reputation for poor employee retention had made him a risky candidate for executive positions, forcing him to rebuild credibility through demonstrated performance rather than previous accomplishments. The contrast between our career trajectories was stark but not entirely surprising. Leadership positions in relationship-dependent industries required understanding of human dynamics and organizational psychology that couldn't be learned through MBA programs or strategic planning exercises. David's systematic marginalization of experienced employees had revealed fundamental gaps in these capabilities, ultimately costing him opportunities for continued advancement. I responded to David's email with professional courtesy and genuine appreciation for his acknowledgement of past mistakes. His willingness to accept responsibility for poor decisions was admirable, even though it came years after the consequences had become apparent. More importantly, his current struggles served as valuable reminders about the importance of treating people with respect and recognition, regardless of their position in organizational hierarchies. The IPO launch exceeded all expectations, with strong institutional demand driving our opening price 37% above the initial offering range. The market reception validated our strategic approach while creating substantial wealth for employees who had contributed to Rodriguez and Associates' success through equity participation programs. Jessica, Mike, Amanda, and dozens of other team members became millionaires overnight, demonstrating the financial benefits of building organizations where individual contributions were appropriately recognized and rewarded. The opening bell ceremony at the New York Stock Exchange was attended by our core leadership team, including several employees who had joined us during the early expansion phases and contributed essential expertise to our growth trajectory. Standing on the trading floor, watching Rodriguez and Associates' ticker symbol display our company's market valuation, I thought about the conversation that had started this journey 5 years earlier. David's laughter had been intended to reinforce my dependence on TechBridge's employment while dismissing alternatives he couldn't imagine. Instead, it had marked the beginning of professional independence that ultimately created opportunities, extending far beyond anything his organizational restructuring could have provided. The sound of someone who fundamentally misunderstood professional relationships had become the catalyst for building partnerships based on mutual respect, appropriate recognition, and shared financial success. The financial impact of our success extended far beyond personal wealth creation. Rodriguez and Associates' growth had created over 400 direct employment opportunities across our 6 office locations, with additional economic benefits flowing to vendors, suppliers, and service providers throughout our operational regions. The consulting services we provided to client companies had generated measurable improvements in their operational efficiency and strategic capabilities, creating value that multiplied throughout their respective industries. More significantly, our success had influenced industry standards and expectations about employee development and retention strategies. Consulting firms throughout the Southwest had begun implementing equity participation programs and relationship-focused service models that reflected lessons learned from Rodriguez and Associates' competitive advantages. The transformation wasn't universal, but it represented meaningful progress toward organizational cultures that valued individual contributions while supporting professional growth. 6 months after our IPO, Rodriguez and Associates announced the acquisition of 2 smaller consulting firms in Phoenix and San Antonio, expanding our geographic footprint while maintaining our commitment to personalized service and employee development. The acquisitions were structured to preserve existing client relationships while providing advancement opportunities for talented individuals who had been constrained by their previous employer's limited growth prospects. The integration process revealed familiar patterns of undervalued employees and marginalized contributors who flourished when given appropriate recognition and support. Their success reinforced our understanding that talent was widely distributed, but opportunity was often artificially constrained by organizational structures that prioritized administrative convenience over individual potential. As Rodriguez and Associates approached its 6th anniversary, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey from marginalized employee to successful entrepreneur to public company executive. The transformation had been both personal and professional, involving fundamental changes in how I understood my own value and capabilities while building an organization that reflected these insights. The most satisfying aspect wasn't the financial success or professional recognition, though both were gratifying after years of systematic undervaluation. It was the knowledge that we had created opportunities for hundreds of talented individuals to achieve their potential while building genuine partnerships with clients who valued our contributions. The culture we had established would continue supporting success long after any individual leader moved on to other opportunities. David's dismissive laughter had inadvertently launched a chain of events that demonstrated the true value of relationship, management, and employee recognition in professional services. His assumption that I lacked viable alternatives had been proven spectacularly wrong, but more importantly, his failure to understand these dynamics had created opportunities for building something significantly better than what TechBridge could have provided. The final vindication came when Rodriguez and Associates was selected as the exclusive technology consulting partner for a consortium of Fortune 100 companies implementing coordinated digital transformation initiatives across multiple industries. The contract was worth over $500 million over 7 years, representing the largest consulting engagement in our company's history and validation of our strategic approach to relationship building and service delivery. The announcement was covered extensively in business publications that had previously documented TechBridge's decline and our subsequent success. Industry analysts praised our innovative approaches to client partnership and employee development, citing Rodriguez and Associates as a model for sustainable growth in competitive professional services markets. Standing in our Denver headquarters, looking out at the mountains while reviewing the contract documents that would define our next phase of growth, I remembered the moment when everything had changed. David's laughter had lasted maybe 15 seconds, but its consequences had extended across 5 years of extraordinary achievement and professional transformation. Sometimes the most revealing moments in our careers come from people who show us exactly how much we're worth by demonstrating how little they value our contributions. David's dismissive response to my resignation had provided essential information about his judgment and values, information that proved invaluable for making better decisions about my professional future. The $60 million loss that his Decisions inflicted on TechBridge was ultimately insignificant compared to the value created through Rodriguez and Associates' success. But the real lesson wasn't about financial consequences or competitive advantage. It was about recognizing our own worth and pursuing opportunities where contributions are properly valued and rewarded. David's laughter had been the sound of someone who fundamentally misunderstood the dynamics of professional relationships and employee motivation. The silence that followed our departure was the sound of a company learning that some mistakes are too expensive to survive. And the success that followed was the sound of talent, properly valued and supported, achieving results that exceeded everyone's expectations, except our own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.